Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. I'm John Peterson from the Arlington Institute, and we're happy to have you with us here as we get together to talk about some of the most extraordinary and important kind of things related to the big change that's happening in the world today. We come here from the Arlington Institute here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, our little resort town just down the road from Washington and Baltimore in the Appalachian Mountains. And we do this every 2 weeks. We get together, four of us, to talk about these big issues. And I'm happy that all of our panelists are with us again today. Hello, Penny Kelly. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's good to be here. Better than you know.
Well, we're glad you're here. And Kingsley Dennis, how are you, Kingsley?
Hello, John, and greetings to everyone. I'm well, thank you, and coming to you from my bunker somewhere in England.
Yes, right. And Greg Braden. Hello, Greg. How are you?
Well, it's good to be with everyone. I'm coming to you from the command deck of the mothership here and over the high deserts of northern New Mexico.
Yeah. Let's get to our topic of today. There are a couple of aspects of this that are some of which are obvious and some that I hope that we can talk about here that are perhaps a little less obvious. There's the other side of this, though, is the personal preparation. That is to say, the internal or the conceptual or the larger perspective. My kind of brief kind of summary of what this is all about in terms of humans is expanded awareness. That no matter how you characterize what's going on, whether it's awakening or increase in consciousness or any of the other kind of common terms that are used here, they're all about expanded awareness about who we are as individuals, and expanded awareness of the larger environment and how it works, and so on.
First of all, for all of us, what we have to recognize is that we are living and actually accept and embrace the fact that we're living in this time of uncertainty, and there are things that simply cannot be known right now. There are things that we used to be able to do and plan with certainty that cannot be planned with certainty right now. And that's a huge shift, and any kind of shift in our lives like that, to embrace it in a healthy way, begins with the way we think. We could do all the prep stuff, and you identified that. You could have all the food and the water and money stashed away or whatever, and that's all important on a physical level. But the real change is going to come from within. So there are methodologies to help us to embrace these kinds of changes in a healthy way that all deal with resilience. And resilience covers a lot of ground on a lot of different levels. On a very practical level, what we know is that our ability to embrace change is directly linked to our physiology. And part of that physiology is what's called heart rate variability, HRV. It's the time from one beat to the next, to the next, to the next. When we are young, that time varies tremendously. And we see that as young people generally can adapt to change quickly. As we get older, the term is we become set in our ways. And you can actually see that in an EKG, where the time from one beat to the next becomes less variable. It becomes more regular. So, and these changes, they're minute, John, they're in milliseconds. But the point is, there is a difference from one beat to the next. So the remedy for that, and what we can all do in our lives at any age, you can reset your heart rate variability to that of when you were younger by creating coherence between the heart and the brain. We talk about this in our books and other programs, and on this program as well. It is a three-step process of focus, breath, and emotion that harmonizes the neural network in the heart and the brain to create greater heart rate variability, therefore, greater coherence, therefore greater heart rate variability. And we can talk more about that. So on a physiological level, we can all regain more heart rate variability, helping us to become more resilient to the world that is at our doorstep now.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks to Greg, everything you said. This is a difficult question because I think when it comes down to it, we can only answer it on a really personal level, and I think that's where we have to go now. And I can only speak personally, and from my own personal experience, I've been feeling that I've been more and more disengaging with the larger macro physicalness of the transition. And I think I've been realizing that the macro part of the transition is actually been pulling us away from ourselves, away from the individual, and we've been drawn into these energetic entanglements whereby we've been fearing about what's going to happen with the technocracy and with this, with that. I mean, these are valid fears. I'm not saying that, but I feel that they've been taking us away from ourselves. And more and more I've been feeling that this transition is going to happen. It's going to happen on the earth. There's no way to stop it, but we have to learn to individualize it for ourselves. And it's almost as if, it may sound kind of raw, but by saying each person may get the type of transition experience they deserve. So it's how we're going to place ourselves there. Now, there's a valid argument for the physical preparation and the prepping, but that kind of falls into set patterns, about arranging, a little kind of garden and food supply, trying to get out of the dense urban environment. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm reminded of an Eastern tale, a short story. I'll transfer it into a modern setting, base it in America, very short. So it's based in America. So this guy, Randy, he works in New York, and let's say he works for BlackRock. So he's going into the office to BlackRock, and he's in his office, and he's just about to start the day's work, and he sees coming down the office, he sees death approaching. So he ducks behind his desk. He doesn't want anything to do with death. And Death walks past him and then goes into his boss's office and to see his boss. And then Randy thinks, whoa, if Death's in the house, I want to get as far away as possible. I don't want to be around when Death is there. It's too, it's too tricky. So he thinks, where can I go? The furthest possible. So he jumps on a plane. And he goes way away across the coast to San Francisco, the furthest he can get away. In the meantime, Death is sitting down having a cup of tea or coffee with the boss of BlackRock, because they're old buddies. And then they're chatting, and then Death says to the boss, I think I just saw out the corner of my eye Randy in the office back there. And the boss says, yeah, this guy Randy, he works for us. And Death says, well, that's really strange, because in my schedule, I've got an appointment to pick him up in 3 days in San Francisco. So I think what that means is, like, you can't really run away from what's coming. And if you do run away, you're more likely to run into it. So if you can't run away, what's the alternative? The alternative is to find yourself. And I think that's where we need to be. Because in these times of these great cyclic transitions that we go through, we get a splintering of the kind of reality sets and our kind of consciousness states. And we can see that now in how we're relating to different people. We also get a shattering, and it's almost a kind of analogy of the alchemical process. In the alchemical process, you get a separation of the component parts. And then you have to go through a process where you have to work on those component parts in order to then bring them back in a coagulation, in a rearrangement. And if the rearrangement is successful, then you get the gold, metaphorically speaking. So I feel that this is also an alchemical process that we have to individualize for ourselves. So on a physical level, on an external level, we can see this splintering and shattering going on. Now, if we want to get the correct kind of rearrangement and coagulation, it's the time to work on ourselves. And a lot of these forces are top-down, kind of vertical top-down. So how do we work on ourselves? It's through the flows. So I think my sense is that the great things we need to work on are relations. relations with ourselves, because we have to deal with a lot of sides of ourselves, aspects of ourselves that are uncomfortable. So I would put it down to, let's say, relations with ourselves, relations with other people, which would be paramount, relations with the wider community, and also relations with the cosmos, how we understand our connection to a sacred source. So saying that, I think a lot of this externalization of this transition is very profane. And if we start to kind of jump into this profanity and start to battle against this, what we're going to do with this change and struggle with it, we've actually moved ourselves onto their playing field, the profane playing field. I feel that what we need to do is to kind of disentangle ourselves and work out where is our sacred space, where is our playing field, so we can not be caught in their game. And paramount in this time is, I mean, yes, our health, and they're already toxifying our health, our sanity, which is our mental and emotional states, and to be grounded. And to be grounded means also on the earth beneath us and what we can receive, like the lightning rod receives and grounds. So we need to be receptive and grounding. So I'm feeling this transition that is going to really put pressure onto people to learn how to individualize themselves, work on themselves to be in the best place possible so they get the best, correct, most aligned transition that they deserve. So I'll stop there, John.
We have to start listening within. We have to go within. One of the things that I think is really important to understand is that we humans, we start with this little seed, an ovum, and it's joined by a sperm. Look at that start. And then what we end up with 9 months later is a fully developed, well, not quite, but a little human, a little tiny human. And think back to how you were, how you felt, what you perceived, your physical capacities at birth, and maybe at 3, and then at 4, and maybe at 10 years of age, and then at 15. What happens there at puberty is that there's a huge influx of energy. That energy comes directly from source. That energy is blissful. Why do we think we become interested in sex at the age of 14 or at puberty? It's because of that huge influx of energy. What are we meant to do with that energy? We're meant to take that and expand ourselves, to begin to create from within. Now we have the capacity, we can do it mindlessly, and a lot of people do, but that's part of the development process. We are not done developing when we get to be 30 or 40 or 50. We are not done until we become eternal beings. That development process is something that moves ahead, ready or not, it's coming. And one of the issues that occurs is the fact that when a civilization, it gets to the point that we're at, which is fairly advanced, we know we can abstract a lot of things. That's part of that whole process of development. And the civilization either has to embrace the abstract, which forces you to deal with what's not physical. If you can't abstract that, you end up, the whole civilization goes down. And there have been 4 or 5 other civilizations that were here that didn't make it. We are right there, right at that point. We're looking at the change as too small. We're not seeing, I mean, there are a lot of changes that have to happen within. There's all kinds of changes. Oh my gosh, I made a whole list here. There's changes in the money. There's changes in the government coming. There's changes in our health that have incapacitated many people to making that change, because the change is based on the ability to feel. And that injection that people had ruined a lot of feeling, the ability to feel and to identify feeling. I think the society is changing, the technology is changing. But more than that, at the base of all of that is the energy is changing. When we allow the change of energy within, there'll be a concurrent change without, on the outside. And that change is coming. That's plasma physics energy, the ability to, I'm going to say, manipulate fields and lattice structures, and to be able to do all kinds of things with that. That changes everything about our world, how we eat and how we drive around or get around. Driving goes away. Flying, etc. All of those things change. That's big framework changes. Are we ready for that, or are people afraid? People are generally quite afraid. So going inside, we have to get back in touch with true feeling. The truth within is really where it's at. The ability to recognize truth, not just thinking, but feel and then think about that feeling. And then feel again and think about that. That's what the capacity to reflect is about.
We look at the World Economic Forum and the UN because they're close, they're tangible, they're identifiable. I think you look deeper, they're pawns in a much bigger picture. And everything that we're saying here, and Penny, what you just identified, it all comes down to we can only embrace those possibilities if we know who we are. And we have been conditioned for multiple generations away from the deep truth of who we are. So this is where I think those levels of resilience, who are we as spiritual beings, or what does our divinity really mean? And when we begin to embrace those and the deep truth of what those answers are, the changes, we're not going to stop, but we'll interpret those changes by the meaning that we give to the change in our lives. If we don't know who we are, we give that change a meaning and a significance that's distorted based in fear. If we know who we are, then we see ourselves in relation to that change in a different way. And we can, I'm not going to say control, but I'm going to say we can participate. We can influence those changes in healthy ways that help us to achieve our goals of divinity. And I think on a deep level, Penny, you're right on. As a geologist, well, I can tell you this planet is being terraformed. We talked about that in an earlier conversation, and some people pushed back on it a little bit. But if we are to meet the goals that are set by the UN and the WEF for temperature and CO2 levels, we're not living on the same planet anymore. We pushed it back to the middle of the Pleistocene. That's another conversation, but we don't benefit from that. So you have to say who does. And I think you've alluded to that in your conversations, in your talks.
Yeah, I think you said it, Kingsley said it. We have been entertained away from ourselves, and we're lost. We're lost out there. I mean, that's the whole point, is that we're being forced to go back inside. Go back inside. I mean, that's where the magic happens. We are so powerful. Why don't we spend time, instead of competing for all this external stuff, why don't we spend time learning to direct and use and develop that power? That power is waiting. It's waiting. So it's not too late.
When you said that, Penny, I just had the thought that Neil Postman had that wonderful title of a book, "Amusing Ourselves to Death."
Oh,
And you know,
yes.
there's a true account in history of I think it was during the Roman period, where during an amphitheater, the participants went to watch a theater, and they didn't realize that, of course, there was like the invasion coming. So they was engrossed on watching this theater play. And then during the theater play, these invaders actually appeared at the top of the amphitheater behind the spectators, and they couldn't see them. The only people who could see them were the people in the amphitheater during the play. So they were pointing up there, look. And initially the spectators thought it was part of the play. They didn't realize they were being told to look there, you know, they were just looking down there, which reminds us of that film that came out last year, Don't Look Up, you know. So So I think there's a time of, what I'm trying to say is time of confusion. And one of the qualities we need is discernment, because
Yeah.
there's so much, there's so much falsity comes in. And, just to give it a kind of biblical frame, in the apocalypse, when the Antichrist comes mimicking Christ. So just use that analogy, the forces coming in are going to mimic to try to get us on board. So on one side, we need awareness, which is right, and John's been stressing that, and that's true.
Yeah.
On the other side, we need to make sure that we don't start imbibing ourselves, being fed on toxic information, the falsity. Because, what I said about being in the right, and to answer John's question, when he said, like, you have to be aware of this stuff, and we do. But of course, if we do that work on ourselves, we're going to be at a certain state whereby even if we're not totally aware, we're less manipulable because we're not in that zone. We're in a different space. So we need discernment, awareness to a certain degree, but we do have to be in a certain, let's say, to use that word, frequency or vibration or zone, whereby we're not, it's like oil and water. Oil and water doesn't mix because they're a different constitution. We need to be humanity in a different constitution where we're not mixing with the darker elements that are going to be coming in these times.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
See you in 2
Cheers
weeks.
now.
See you soon.